The very thing you use to make them desire you is the chain that locks you in loneliness. Listen closely. I'm about to tell you something they whispered in the Medici courts, something Machiavelli scrawled in the margins of his notebooks when the candles burned low and the wine ran thick. There was a merchant in Florence, wealthy, unremarkable, possessed of neither great beauty nor wit, who had every woman in the city trailing after him like moths to a flame they could never quite touch. The secret? He treated desire like a master treats his hounds, feed them just enough to keep them alive, but never enough to satisfy. Picture this. A humid August evening, the air so thick with jasmine and sweat you could taste it. Velvet curtains drawn against prying eyes. A woman waits in a parlor that smells of melting beeswax and yesterday's roses, checking her reflection in a mirror that's cracked just enough to split her face into fragments, each piece showing a different version of who she thinks she needs to be. She's been waiting for 3 hours. He might come. He might not. That uncertainty has become her religion. You see, modern psychology, those sterile 2024 studies from Cambridge about attachment patterns, they'll tell you what poets have known since Ovid wrote his Ars Amatoria. Humans are wired to want what retreats from them. It's not cruelty, it's choreography. The dance of the mantis, where stepping backward makes them lean forward, where absence becomes more intoxicating than presence ever could be. But here's the grotesque beauty of it all. The part that would make Schopenhauer laugh until he wept. The moment you master this art, the moment you become the flame instead of the moth, you realize you're performing for an empty theater. The applause you hear is just the echo of your own loneliness, bouncing off the walls of a game that nobody actually wins. I knew a man once, let's call him Marcus, who perfected this dark art. Women would send him letters scented with perfume that cost more than most men's monthly wages. They'd wait outside his apartment in the rain, mascara running like tiny rivers of regret down their cheeks. And Marcus? He'd step over them like puddles, not out of malice, but out of a practiced indifference that had become so authentic, he couldn't turn it off anymore. The ancient Stoics had a word for this. Ataraxia, a state of serene indifference, but they meant it as liberation from suffering. What Marcus achieved was something else entirely. He'd become so good at not caring that he'd forgotten how to care at all, like a snake that swallowed its own tail and discovered it tastes like nothing. Here's what they don't tell you in those pickup artist forums. Those sad digital coliseums where broken men trade tips on emotional manipulation, like baseball cards. Every technique that makes someone chase you also builds another brick in the wall between you and genuine connection. You become Midas, but instead of gold, everything you touch turns to performance. Every conversation becomes a chess match. Every moment of vulnerability feels like showing your cards too early. The French have this phrase, l'appel du vide, the call of the void. It's that strange urge you get standing at the edge of a cliff to jump. Not because you want to die, but because some part of you needs to know what falling feels like. That's what this game becomes. You create the void, you become the void, and then you wonder why everyone who falls for you ends up broken at the bottom. A 2020 study from the University of Vienna found that men who consistently employ emotional unavailability as an attraction strategy report feeling profoundly disconnected from their authentic selves within 18 months. 18 months. That's all it takes to lose yourself completely in a game where winning means never actually playing. So here's my question for you, whispered like a confession in a confessional booth where God stopped listening years ago. When you finally get them to chase you, when you've mastered the art of strategic indifference and calculated absence, when you've become the prize everyone wants but no one can have? Who exactly have you become? And more importantly, is that person worth being? The merchant from Florence? He died alone, surrounded by love letters he never answered, in a bed that smelled like lavender and regret. They found him 3 days later. The candles had burned down to nothing, leaving only pools of hardened wax that looked, in the dim light, like frozen tears. You're not mysterious. You're just performing a wound to sell to others. You want to know the real secret? The one they won't print in those glossy magazines with their 10 ways to make her obsessed headlines? We're all walking around pretending our wounds are weapons. Our damage is depth. Our inability to connect is actually a choice. It's the most elaborate theater production ever staged, and nobody remembers buying a ticket. There's an old Romanian folktale, the kind grandmothers whisper to children when the winter nights grow teeth, about a prince who was cursed to wear a mask of ice. Every woman who kissed him would see her deepest desire reflected in that frozen surface. But the prince himself felt nothing but cold. The twist? There was no curse. He'd crafted the mask himself, afraid that his real face was too ordinary to love. I see you doing it, right now. That carefully curated damage you wear like designer clothing. I've been hurt before, you say, as if that makes you interesting. As if pain were a personality. As if every woman wants to be the one who finally heals the broken bird. Not realizing that some birds break their own wings just to see who'll try to fix them. Let me paint you a picture. It's 3 a.m. in a wine bar that should have closed hours ago. The air tastes like cigarette smoke and failed ambitions. A woman sits across from a man who's telling her, for the 3rd time tonight, about how his ex destroyed his ability to trust. His eyes do that practiced, distant thing. You know the look, like he's watching a sad movie only he can see. And she leans in, because damaged people are like puzzles, and everyone thinks they're clever enough to solve them. But here's what Kierkegaard understood when he wrote about the aesthetics of seduction. The performance of depth is not the same as actual depth. It's like the difference between a puddle reflecting the sky and the sky itself. One looks infinite but dries up the moment the sun gets serious. A 2024 Harvard study on attraction patterns found something delicious. People who consistently present themselves as mysteriously damaged attract partners at a rate 73% higher than those who present as emotionally available. But here's the punchline that would make Nietzsche choke on his coffee. Those same relationships have a stability rate of less than 4 months. 4 months. That's how long it takes for someone to realize they're not dating a person. They're dating a performance. You know what's truly grotesque? The way we've turned emotional unavailability into a luxury brand. Like those ripped jeans that cost $500. We're charging premium prices for what's essentially damage. Oh, he never texts back. He must be so deep, so complicated. No, darling. He's just learned that inconsistency looks like complexity if you squint hard enough. I once watched a man, let's call him Vincent, systematically destroy every relationship he'd ever had by being exactly mysterious enough to seem interesting, but never present enough to be known. He had this routine: reveal just enough trauma to seem vulnerable, pull back just before genuine connection, leave them wondering if they were special enough to save him. He collected broken hearts like some men collect watches, not to tell time, but to show he could afford them. The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the repaired piece more beautiful than the original. But what we're doing, we're taking perfectly good pottery, smashing it ourselves, and then refusing to let anyone near us with the gold. We're walking around covered in cracks, calling it character. Here's the nauseating truth that bubbles up like swamp gas from the depths of this whole charade. The dark, mysterious man that women supposedly can't resist? He's usually just an emotionally constipated boy who learned that absence feels like presence if you market it right. It's like selling empty picture frames and calling them minimalist art. There was a philosopher in Prague, died in 2023 actually, you might have heard of him, who spent his entire career studying what he called the romanticism of damage. His conclusion, after 40 years of research, we're so terrified of being ordinary that we'd rather be broken than boring. We've convinced ourselves that scars are more interesting than skin, that shadows have more substance than light. But shadows, my friend, are just the absence of illumination. They're not mysterious. They're missing. So riddle me this, you beautiful disaster, you carefully crafted catastrophe. What happens when the performance ends? When the lights come up and the audience goes home? When you're standing there in your apartment at 4 a.m., still wearing your mask of practiced indifference, and you realize you can't remember what your real face looks like? When every woman who was supposed to fix you has figured out you don't want to be fixed, you want to be fascinating. The prince from the Romanian tale? One day, a blind woman loved him. She couldn't see the mask, couldn't see her desires reflected back. She just felt the cold and loved him anyway. And when he finally removed the mask, thinking his ordinary face would disappoint her, she laughed. "I know," she said. "I've always known. The cold gave you away." You've succeeded so well, you've killed your own ability to feel. Here's a joke for you, though nobody's laughing. A man walks into a therapist's office and says, "Doctor, I've become irresistible to women. They chase me constantly. I've mastered every technique, every psychological trigger, every dark art of attraction." "And what seems to be the problem?" asks the therapist. "I haven't felt anything real in 7 years." And the therapist nods and writes in her notepad, "Patient has successfully committed emotional suicide. Still breathing, technically." Let me tell you about the muerte pequeña, the little death. Not the one the French whisper about between silk sheets, but the one that happens when you optimize yourself out of existence. When you become so good at the game that you forget you're not a player. You're the ball being kicked around the field. There's a monastery in Tibet where they practice something called sky burial. They leave bodies on mountaintops for vultures to consume, believing it returns the flesh to the cycle of life. But what we're doing? We're performing sky burial on ourselves while we're still alive, feeding pieces of our authenticity to whoever's hungry enough to circle overhead. Eventually, there's nothing left but bones pretending to be a person. Picture this scene, because I lived it once. Venice 2019, before the world learned to wear masks for different reasons. A man sits in a cafe overlooking a canal that smells like history rotting in water. 3 different women text him within the span of 5 minutes. Each thinks she's special. Each thinks she's close to breaking through his walls. He responds to each with calculated delays, measured words. Just enough warmth to keep them burning, but never enough to let them rest. And then, this is the beautiful, horrible part. His coffee goes cold because he's so busy managing his performance that he forgets to drink it. He's so focused on being wanted that he forgets to want anything himself. He's become like those Victorian automatons, those mechanical dolls that could dance and play piano, but had nothing inside but gears and springs. Sophisticated, mesmerizing, and fundamentally empty. Schopenhauer wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. But he missed the third option, the numbness of perpetual performance. It's like being a method actor who's been in character so long, you need cue cards to remember your real name. A 2025 neuroscience study from Stockholm revealed something that should terrify anyone playing this game. Men who consistently employ manipulative attraction strategies show decreased activity in the brain regions associated with genuine emotional response. Their brains literally forget how to feel authentically. They're not choosing to be cold. They're neurologically rewiring themselves into emotional corpses. You want to know what Machiavelli actually said about love? Not the bastardized quotes on Instagram over sunset photos. He said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." But here's the cosmic joke he didn't mention. When you perfect the appearance, you murder the reality. You become the mask eating the face. I knew a pickup artist once, made millions teaching men how to be alpha, had a different woman every night, sometimes two. You know where I met him? At a suicide prevention hotline at 3 a.m. Not calling for help. He was beyond that. He called just to hear someone speak to him like he was human. Not a strategy, not a game, not a performance. Just human. The volunteer on the other end had no idea she was talking to a man who'd written books on seduction. She just heard someone who'd forgotten what his own voice sounded like when it wasn't trying to seduce. The ancient Greeks had this concept, thanatos, the death drive. Freud borrowed it later, but the Greeks understood it better. It's not the desire to die, it's the desire to return to a state of non-being, of numbness, of stone. And that's what mastery of manipulation delivers. You become marble pretending to be flesh, beautiful to look at, cold to touch, and utterly incapable of feeling the warmth you inspire in others. Here's the most hilarious tragedy of all. And I mean hilarious in that way that makes you want to scream. The men who get the best at making women chase them are the ones who've forgotten why they wanted to be chased in the first place. It's like training your whole life to win a race, then forgetting what the prize was supposed to be. You stand there with your trophy, and it's full of ashes that might have once been your heart. There's a Serbian proverb, "Be humble, for you are made of earth. Be noble, for you are made of stars." But what happens when you've spent so long pretending to be a constellation that you forget you were ever human? When every interaction becomes a calculation, every moment of tenderness feels like showing weakness, every genuine laugh sounds foreign in your throat. So here's my accusation, dressed as a question, delivered like a dagger wrapped in silk. You've mastered the art of making them chase you. Congratulations, you've won the emptiest prize in the universe. But tell me, when was the last time you chased something? Not someone, something. A sunset, a melody, a moment of genuine joy that wasn't immediately cataloged as a tool for future manipulation. When did you last feel something that wasn't strategic? The man in Venice? That was me. And the coffee wasn't the only thing that went cold that day. She loves the man you accidentally showed once, not the one you perform every day. Listen to the rain. Can you hear it? No? That's because it's not raining. But you expected it to be, didn't you? In stories like these, it's always raining. That's what we do. We expect the atmosphere to match our internal weather, not realizing we're the ones controlling the barometer. There's a garden in Kyoto where they grow roses that never bloom. The gardener, a 90-year-old man whose hands look like maps of territories that no longer exist, deliberately stunts them. Tourists pay thousands to see these forever pregnant buds, these promises that never deliver. More beautiful than blooming, he says, because they hold infinite potential. But I've seen those roses up close. They're not holding potential. They're holding their breath until they turn blue. That's what you've become, isn't it? A garden of promises you never intend to keep. Each woman who enters your life thinks she's found something special, a rose about to bloom just for her. But you've mastered the art of eternal almost vulnerable, almost available, almost real, almost, until almost becomes never, and never becomes the only thing you know how to be. I once read a love letter, not meant for me, found in a book at the estate sale of a dead philosopher. The woman wrote, "You were different on Tuesday. On Tuesday, you forgot to perform, and I saw you, the real you. He was terrified and tender and terrible at lying. I fell in love with Tuesday you. But he never came back. I've been dating Wednesday through Monday ever since, and they're all strangers wearing your face." This is the thing about becoming a master of seduction. You create a different version of yourself for every day of the week, every woman, every context. You're a shapeshifter, a chameleon, a method actor who's playing 7 different roles simultaneously. But here's what happens. And there's a 2024 MIT study that proves this mathematically, if you can believe it. The more versions of yourself you create, the less substantial each one becomes. You're not multiplying, you're dividing, splitting yourself into fractions until each piece is too small to sustain life. The Hindus have this concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion that makes us think the performance is reality. But at least Maya is divine deception. What we're doing is more like community theater, where everyone forgot their lines, so they're just making increasingly desperate gestures at meaning. Here's a secret that would make Casanova weep into his wine. Every single woman who's ever chased you wasn't actually chasing you. She was chasing the ghost of who you pretended to be in that one unguarded moment when your mask slipped. She fell in love with your mistakes, your fumbles, the coffee you spilled on your shirt when you forgot you were supposed to be smooth. She's been hunting for that human ever since, not knowing he was an accident you've been trying to correct. You know what's genuinely hilarious? We've created an entire culture around high-value men and sexual market value and attraction triggers, as if human connection were a stock market where you can insider trade on emotions. As if love were a cryptocurrency you can mine by running the right behavioral algorithms. But every man who's successfully gamed this system ends up the same way. Rich in attention, bankrupt in affection, counting coins that dissolve the moment they touch something real. A philosopher in Berlin, still alive actually, probably reading this and recognizing herself, once told me, "The problem with men who make women chase them is that they're always running too. They're just running backwards, watching everyone follow, so terrified of being caught that they don't realize they're backing off a cliff." Let me tell you about the saddest thing I ever witnessed. A wedding. The groom had been the ultimate player, the master of the game, the one who had women lined up like dominoes. He'd finally settled down with a woman who'd chased him for 3 years. During his vows, he performed beautifully, said all the right words, hit all the right notes. The audience wept, but I was watching his hands. They were shaking, not from nerves, from the effort of trying to remember which version of himself had proposed. He literally couldn't remember which personality she'd said yes to. They divorced 14 months later. She said, "I married 7 different men, and none of them were you." Here's what Nietzsche understood about the eternal return that we don't. It's not about time circling back. It's about patterns repeating until they become prisons. Every time you successfully make someone chase you using the same tricks, the same emotional sleight of hand, you're building another bar in your cell. Eventually, you're so good at the game that you can't stop playing even when you want to. You meet someone genuine, someone who sees through the performance, someone who just wants you, and you don't know how to stop performing long enough to be wanted. The gardener in Kyoto. I asked him once if he'd ever let just one rose bloom, just to see. He looked at me with eyes that had given up expecting anything to change and said, "I've forgotten how. I've been preventing blooms so long, I don't remember what it takes to allow one." So here's my quiet whisper of a question, delivered like a confession you shouldn't hear. When she finally catches you, and someone always does, that's the cruel mathematics of this game. What exactly has she caught? A man? A strategy? A collection of rehearsed responses? Or just another rose that forgot how to bloom, standing in a garden of beautiful potential that will never, ever become real? The rain still isn't falling, but you're still expecting it, aren't you? That's the sound of pattern recognition. Or maybe it's just the sound of all those stunted roses, gasping for permission to finally become themselves. When you stop digging, you realize you were never trapped. In the end, the prison had no locks. We were the keys, turning ourselves. There's a monastery in the Alps. You have to climb for 3 days to reach it, and most people turn back when they realize the path is just sharp rocks and their own heavy breathing. The monks there practice something they call the beautiful surrender. Not surrender to God, not to fate, but to the radical idea that you don't have to be anything other than what you are when nobody's watching. I met a man there, used to be like us, like you, a master manipulator, a professional ghost, someone who'd turned himself into a hall of mirrors where every reflection was a lie. You know what broke him? What sent him climbing those mountains with bloody feet and emptied eyes? A child, his own daughter, 4 years old, looked at him one morning and said, "Daddy, why do you practice your face in the mirror?" Children see everything. They haven't learned to politely ignore the performance yet. Let me tell you something that will sound like hope but tastes like ashes. There's a way out. But it's not triumphant. It's not a victory. It's more like what happens when you've been holding your breath underwater for so long that drowning starts to feel like breathing, and then suddenly, accidentally, you surface. The air hurts. Everything hurts. But you're alive, and alive means you can still choose. There's a psychological phenomenon discovered in 2025. They're calling it authentic collapse. It's what happens when men who've built their entire identity on strategic emotional manipulation suddenly, spontaneously, can't do it anymore. Not won't, can't. Their nervous system just refuses. Like a pianist who's played the same false song so many times that their fingers rebel, refuse to hit the dishonest notes. The body, it turns out, keeps the score, and eventually, it demands payment for every lie you've told with it. A poet in Prague, the same city where that philosopher studied the romanticism of damage, wrote, "The grave you're digging isn't for your loneliness, it's for your chance at connection." Every time you successfully manipulate someone into chasing you, you throw another shovelful of dirt on the possibility of ever being genuinely known. But here's the secret that tastes like copper pennies and old rain. You can stop digging, right now, this second. The shovel was always optional. You want to know something genuinely terrifying? More terrifying than loneliness, than rejection, than dying untouched. Being loved for who you actually are. Not the performance, not the strategy, not the carefully calibrated absence that makes you seem mysterious. The actual you. The one who sometimes cries at commercials. The one who's scared of being ordinary. The one who learned to manipulate because being real felt like being naked in a snowstorm. I'll tell you about the most powerful thing I ever witnessed. A man, brilliant at the game, legendary really, sitting across from a woman he'd been strategically attracting for months. All the techniques deployed, all the triggers pulled. She was completely hooked, ready to chase him to the ends of the earth. And then he did something I'd never seen before. He stopped, mid-sentence, mid-performance. His face did this thing, like watching ice crack on a frozen lake. And he said, "I'm sorry. I've been lying. Not about facts, but about who I am. I'm terrified you'll find me boring if I stop performing, but I'm more terrified of never being real with anyone." She left. Of course she left. She'd fallen for someone who didn't exist. But here's the part that matters. He didn't die. The world didn't end. He just sat there, in that empty restaurant, being nobody special for the first time in years. And he laughed. Not performative laughter, not strategic charm, the kind of laugh that happens when you realize the monster under your bed was just your own shadow, and you've been feeding it your happiness for decades. Kierkegaard wrote about the leap of faith, but he was talking about God. What we need is a leap of faith into ordinariness, into being unremarkable, into showing up as ourselves and letting that be enough or not enough, and living with whichever verdict comes. The monks in the Alps have this saying, "The heaviest thing you can carry is an empty self." And that's what you've become, hasn't it? A beautiful emptiness, a designer void, a professionally hollow man who's so light, he floats above every real connection, never touching ground, never touching anything. But gravity is optional only as long as you keep performing. The moment you stop, you fall. And falling, here's the cosmic joke that breaks my heart. Falling is just another word for landing somewhere real. So here's my final dare, my last whisper into the void you've become. Tomorrow, be boring. Be exactly as interesting as you are when you're alone at 3 a.m. eating cereal in your underwear. Show up to a date with no techniques, no strategies, no calculated distance. Bring nothing but your ordinary self. She'll probably leave. Most of them will leave. But one won't. And that one? She'll be falling in love with an actual person, not a performance. The man from the monastery? 3 years later, I saw him in a coffee shop in Vienna with a woman. They were sitting in complete silence, reading different books, occasionally reaching over to steal each other's pastries. Nobody was chasing anyone. They'd both already arrived. He looked absolutely ordinary. He looked free. The graves we dig for our authentic selves, they're not that deep. You can climb out any time. The dirt under your fingernails will be real. The sunlight will hurt your eyes. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, you'll cast an actual shadow instead of being one. But you won't do it, will you? Because this script, this performance, this careful dance of strategic absence, it's safer than being known. It's safer than being human. It's safer than discovering that the ordinary you, the one without techniques or tricks, might actually be enough. The liberation isn't in making them chase you. It's in standing still long enough to be caught.